Thank you for tuning in to this podcast. We have brought together educators from across the Ottawa area to review the Netflix series You. In this podcast, you will hear from the following people.
Daniella Noël,
who is the Education Coordinator at the Canadian Centre for Gender and Sexual Diversity. The Canadian Centre for Gender and Sexual Diversity provides education and advocacy on LGBTQ issues. You will also hear from
Crockford,
who is the Education and Communication Coordinator at the Ottawa Rape Crisis Centre, where they provide support to survivors of sexual violence and public education services. You will hear from
Amina Doreh,
who is the Public Education Coordinator at the Sexual Assault Support Centre in Ottawa, where they provide support to survivors of sexual violence as well. And finally, you will hear from me, Ceara McIntyre, at Planned Parenthood Ottawa, where I'm the Education Coordinator. At Planned Parenthood, we provide counseling and education on sexual health topics that include birth control, healthy relationships, and consent.
The show is led by the main character, Joe Goldberg, I believe his last name is. So he is the central character who becomes obsessed with another character named Beck. He kind of fabricates a relationship in which he believes that she is the kind of sole purpose for his life. And throughout the show, you see a lot of the unhealthy dynamics between Beck and other aspects or other people in her life, as well as Joe. And there's a lot of different plot twists around the ways in which the relationship becomes more complicated. But essentially, Joe is a stalker. He's somebody who has unhealthy fixation with Beck, but it's not as black and white as it's portrayed in the synopsis, right? There's a lot of ways in which his behavior is normalized, his behavior is excused, and obviously through that the point of view of Joe, right? So it is obscured in a way where he is the narrator, so he's the one who's essentially portraying what he believes to be justified and not.
It is on Netflix. You can watch it before you listen to the podcast, but we'll dive in and talk a little bit about the show. Was there, you talked about...
Yeah, so the other thing is just if when you're watching the show or when you're listening to the podcast, because we are going to be talking about some of the same situations, something comes up and you want to talk to someone, you feel uncomfortable, find yourself in crisis, you can reach out to either the Ottawa Rape Crisis Centre's 24-hour crisis line, and the number for that is 613-562-2333, or you can reach out to the Sexual Assault Support Centre of Ottawa's support line, the number for which is
613-234-2266.
All right.
So why don't we start with what are some of the things that Joe does at the beginning that is super problematic, but then he justifies, and like, why does he justify them?
The first two episodes, that's what I said before. Like, first two episodes, it's like, get all of the creepiness out. Like, flush it all out.
Yeah.
He's stalking through the window. Masturbating. Oh, look, she knows she wants it when she sees me, when she's looking at me. You know, she paid the way she paid, and just this whole internal narrative that he has.
Let's talk about that internal narrative. So, he starts by talking about, like, she walks into the bookstore, and he's like, oh, you're wearing bracelets. This must means you want attention, and oh, you're not wearing a bra and you're reaching up, and oh, it's because you want me to see your nipples, and like, oh, you're not paying with cash, you're paying with card because you want me to know your name. So he justifies all this, but like, why? And how is it still creepy?
again, like, he has a very fixed view of who he wants her to be, right? So anything that might illuminate to that or might validate that narrative that he has, he's going to justify, right? So again, there could be many different reasons as to why she's done all or made the decisions that she's made, right? But ultimately, he has a very, again, fixed narrative that he wants her to fit in, right? So, the examples that you just talked about, like, she's paying with her card because she wants me to know her name, or she's wearing this because she wants to elicit that, right? Like, he has a very kind of myopic view of how she acts in order to fit his narrative. So again, it's not about her. It's not about trying to figure out organically why she's making these decisions. And a lot of his assumptions are based on very like misogynist points of view, right? So he believes that, like, oh, she's wearing this because she's trying to seduce me, or she's moving in this way because it's ultimately trying to serve his own purposes.
Yeah, it's all about him, right? Like, it's like the clothes you put on this morning must have been about me, even though you never met me, right? Like, that you didn't know, and like the way that you and the justification piece as well, I think, is also interesting, because there are things that, like, I think work as justification in film and television, like, you're paying with card, so you want me to know your name. I'm like, if somebody did that in real life, if I paid with something using my card, which is what I do all the time, and somebody just took my card, and took my card and was like, your name is Allie Crockford, I'd be like, what is happening here? Like, I think it's something that, like, when it's against, in this sort of context of it's a romance or it's a TV show, it's like, oh, okay, well, that's how you get to know someone.
Yeah, and it's the trope of the rom-com, right? Like, oh, wow. Because when the feeling is mutual, it's something that's okay, and that's how it's
exactly
perceived in movies. That's how it's perceived in society, that, like, oh, okay, well, if it was something, it's super romantic if the person you were really attracted to did this and was like, oh, wow, they looked at my card for my number. When in reality, it's just like, no.
It's like, exactly.
Like, it's too much. And it kind of, and very much so, I think a lot of the themes in the movie, it was that idea of, like, trying to put, like, instant obsession, like toxic obsession, as love at first sight.
Yes. I kept thinking, like, when he did that, like, when he did all of those things, I was like, if his coworker Ethan had done those things, it would have been so different. She would have been like, nope. Like, I think that's what something that you, Ceara, were saying was, like, what if he wasn't this attractive white guy, right? And I think you would see that very clearly, is that it would be creepy and the response would be different. And I just would be interesting to see, like, what if they had Ethan doing that and her response was the same to, like, flirt and whatever, like, how would people have responded?
Exactly.
And again, like, going back to the idea that this is narrated from his position, right? So he is perceiving this interaction as, she is fully committed and she wants whatever it is that I'm, interacting with her with, right? He believes that she is an equal part, or he's trying to convince the audience that she is an equal party in this situation, when I would be interested to see maybe from her perspective how that interaction was.
So with her point of view?
Of the first interaction.
Yes. Where
I
she's
didn't do laundry this morning, so I couldn't wear a bra. And I'm wearing bangled jewelry because, like, I left it on from the night before.
And I'm paying with a card because I don't have cash. Right?
Or, like, he says at one point, he's like, you have cash in your wallet, but you're paying with card. And it's like, well, maybe I have to go and, like, use this cash. Like, I'm going to get a haircut and they only take cash or whatever. Like,
But again, like, he never actually vocalizes any of these things because he knows on a conscious level that it would come off as creepy. Yes, right? So these are all internal things, right? So he keeps these to himself, but he's still interacting with her in a very kind of benign way where he's just,
If somebody said to you, I can't help but notice that you're paying with cards, so obviously you want me to know your name, you'd be like, all right, douchebag, like, back off.
Yeah.
And then I think the coworker says, like, oh, did you get her number? And he's like, oh, no, but she's just being nice. So he vocalizes the acceptable answer.
Yes.
But inside, he's like, no, you're this equal party. Even though I don't even know how much they communicate But not for, she doesn't talk a lot in the first like couple of scenes.
No.
And their first couple of scenes are of him, again, using that kind of creepy stalker kind of approach where he's like, look at this guy, he's going to buy this. And he's like reading people and inflicting a narrative on them that is purely of his own design. And the show obviously backs it up because the guy does seem like he wants to buy this Dan Brown novel or whatever, but it's just like, right? And so it starts off with that kind of like, we are in the know. Like he brings her in and he's like, now you are in the know with me.
Except that she doesn't really talk about, she does a little bit, but she doesn't validate all the things that he says.
Yeah, and I think maybe there's a part of him where when there are situations where he is reading it correctly, that he believes everything that he says is correct or everything that he believes is correct.
It fits into his worldview, and so he takes it. There's a term for that. Just like
narcissism?
When you only take the evidence
confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias.
Yes. When you're only taking the evidence that fits what you already
and narcissism works too.
But it's also not just a confirmation bias, because there are things where he doesn't get confirmation and he just assumes he is correct.
Yeah.
Like when he is talking about Dan Brown guy, or when he's talking about her and what she's wearing and what she's doing, like he doesn't get confirmation, but it's presented as like, of course truth. I'm correct. Because it's his view, so that is just what you get. There's no room for interpretation.
And I think that's what makes his character so relatable in the sense that they do that, because he understands that if he says a certain thing, that might come off as creepy, or this is something. And that's something that we all internalize in ourselves. Like, oh, maybe I shouldn't say that, or maybe I shouldn't do that. So it makes him more of a relatable character, even though maybe we don't reach the heights of the thoughts that he is having, but we've all had that moment where you're like, ooh, I shouldn't say that, even though you thought about it in your head, or oh, I shouldn't talk to somebody that way, or it's just like, but you know you thought about it and there was a moment where you were like, I'm going to say this, but then you stop yourself. So it's like making him relatable on that way makes it so that the behavior is almost acceptable, because it's just like, oh, I had something similar. Something similar.
Yeah. But again, his intentions are much different than the average person, right? So it's a matter of like him holding back because he knows that there is a specific, he's playing the long game essentially, right?
But then I don't know that his intentions are that different from the average person, right? Like I feel like
he wants love.
He wants what he thinks is love, right? And he wants, and that idea, I think, of like, we want people to be who we think they are. We want stories to go the way that we think they should. I think that's a common motivation. I think his obviously is taken to a much more sensationalistic extreme, but I think that lots of people, when you are approaching someone you find attractive, you have a sense of like, this is how I want it to go,
right?
And you're trying to encourage things to go that way. A lot of what is really relatable is that he's describing what he's doing with the intent of like, and this will elicit this response. So if I say this, you will say this. And that persists throughout their whole relationship, that he's saying things to get a specific response, which I think that's something that is lots of people do. Like it's a very normal thing, especially in the early stages of a relationship where you're very much trying to create a romance story of your own, right?
But those actions are in direct contrast to the deviant things that he's doing at the same time, right? So if that narrative was just presented on its own accord, then people might be able to see it as, oh, he's just a regular guy trying to go through the motions of a potential relationship.
But then he finds her on Facebook
and then he's behind her when she's walking, and he's outside of her house, and he's so like
in her house.
So like all of those actions, you know, the normal things.
It's not just I saw
people,
you in a store and I thought maybe.
Or we chatted up and then
that was the end of it.
Or and there's so many people that are guilty of being like, oh, I only had their first name, or I found out their name and then I went and looked them up on Facebook and things like that. Or before a date, you look up somebody's Facebook and you find out who they are and maybe a little bit of what they're interested in, so then you have something as a talking point. So everything that he did is just so innocent, and then it's just like it explodes into something that is toxic, and just like
I was interested, like I'd be interested to know some of the like people who are watching this, was there a point, because I feel like there's a point where like you follow along his various steps. What was the point where you went, that's a step too far?
Masturbating outside the window, that one.
Yes.
Or even being outside of her window in the first
place. But like being
finding her house.
In, Googling her and then using a picture of her place in the background to find her street address so that you get like, and it's just interesting that like I feel like there are things that people would do. They'd be like Googling someone that you meet and you find out their name. You Google them, find them on social media. People be like, yeah, that's normal. And then even things like, you see that they're going to be at a bar. Maybe you just go to the same bar in the hope that you bump into them again. Like, and people be like, that's a normal thing to do. So it's like, I think it's, you're right that it's like, it's by degrees because we've been socialized to accept that a certain amount of invasion of privacy is romantic and cute, right?
The meet cute. Meet cute. The famous meet cute. Boy.
And again, like it just like one of the overarching themes in the show is like the pervasiveness of technology in everybody's lives, right? The ways in which technology is like kind of consuming every interaction and every situation that you're in. So he does just utilize that in a way that every, I guess, regular person does, right? But then he, like you said, he takes it to an extreme, right? He sees that line and he pushes right through that line. And when you are seeing that behavior and in conjunction with the seemingly normal things, it's hard for people to make that, to distinguish like, okay, well, that's a bad behavior and that's a good behavior, right? So I think it was intentional by the writers to kind of put them side by side so that the audience kind of has a hard time distinguishing what is healthy and what's not,
and making things seem more innocent, like what he was doing with Beck in the sense of keeping her phone and knowing where she was. Like that was, but at least he's not like when it was with Benji in the sense where he's like faking locations where he is, what he's doing, because he's not like he doesn't have her caged up yet. He's not doing that. He's just trying to keep tabs on her. Whereas then we can see the polar opposite of that with Benji is that like, okay, he's fabricating this whole story because he is eventually going to murder him or do something tragic to Benji, right? So you're just like, oh, but he's really keeping it light and fun with that,
or he's not
like, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
Just gonna say the way that he does that, like by keeping her phone. And I was thinking of like how many apps there are available to allow you to track somebody's phone, and they're used by abusive partners in order to keep tabs on the people, or allow you to mirror someone's phone so you can see their activity or you can access their accounts. Like there are apps that have been developed for that.
She does it.
And but it's like he doesn't use those apps, which I think is a really clever thing for them to have done, because if he had been like, I have your phone, I'm going to download one of these apps and then let you find it again, somehow that would be creepier because he put the like
thought and effort
into it. But like the way they present it as like, I'm not really thinking that far ahead, I'm just going with what seems appropriate at the time, and then I just happened like, it's just still logged in, I didn't do anything, I just didn't log out, I didn't get rid of it there. So it's not like, it's a clever way of, I think, presenting him as being innocent when
he's very intentional
about what he's doing. Like it is the exact same as if he had her phone and downloaded an app that allowed him to follow where she was, because he then lies his way into her apartment so that he can steal her panties and whatnot, look at her laptop and so like he is very intentional, but I think they are smart about the way they show him using technology and that they don't show him like doing anything that would alienate your average average person watching it.
Technology and social media, it makes you vulnerable. And he talks about like, oh, well, your phone isn't locked and your laptop isn't locked and all these other things.
But like and we were talking about this earlier, as if it's her fault, and you find yourself in that point of like, while he's saying, why don't you password protect your laptop, or why don't you password protect your phone, I was sitting there going like, oh my god, why haven't you password protected your phone? And
then I'm
like,
why are you in her house? Why are you following her?
Why is this
like
a thing? But then why am I agreeing with him? Like why have you put me in that situation? And so I think that was a really effective move.
Thing with the narrative.
Because like frankly, people don't usually see see themselves as bad people. So if they see something as a commonality, if this person is exhibiting this behavior that I've done, I'm not a bad person, therefore they're not a bad person, right? So it's like, it kind of alleviates the guilt of having to interrogate your own issues and what you believe to be true. So I think that was, again, like another intentional piece by the writers, right? To invoke that sense of familiarity from the audience.
And people do that all the time with abusers, where they're like, well, I have occasionally glanced at my partner's texts. Therefore, the fact that your partner clones your phone and reads all your texts isn't really that bad. You know, like people do
like
that
moving
kind of
the
thing.
goalpost always with what's acceptable behavior based off of like your own perception of who you think you are. So yeah, like there's tons of ways in which he is constantly rationalizing his behavior, right? Because again, he sees himself as a fundamentally good person who's just trying to control impulses. He doesn't see his behavior. He sees his behavior as like not an extension of who he actually is, right? Yeah. So it's like he sees that he's on a mission for some sort of greater good, which is to protect, in quotations, Beck, right?
Yeah.
So anything that he does is
the love of Beck.
Yeah.
Is in her benefit.
Yes.
Well, you can tell as the show goes along, him creating this reality for himself is what distanced him from actual reality so much, right? When we're talking about the ex-girlfriend and the thinking back to like the times with her and how they parallel, and like, is she a real person? Isn't she like, what's going on? Is she alive?
Is she in Italy?
Is she dead? And that was something that they used like in American Psycho too. It's that was this even real? Did I actually do this? Is this the person that I am? Having to because you've created such an alternate reality of who you actually are, then it pulls you away from even realizing like what is real, what is happening, what isn't. Like who am I?
And as an audience member, you don't really have that clarity because he's the one who's in control of that narrative, right? So, you know, if somebody who is watching this who doesn't really have, who hasn't peeled back the layers or hasn't seen it from different angles, they might take his word for it because he's the only, I guess, narrator, the only person who is showing you what is happening in the story, right? There are glimpses of times where Beck is a narrator and you do see him fall back a bit, but he is essentially the one who's in control of what you believe is happening, right? And that's a distorted view, right? He tries to convince himself, he tries to convince the people in his world, and he tries to convince the audience that what he's doing is for a good purpose. And
I guess the cracks that you see are like when you see him try to convince himself, that to some extent cracks the narrative for the audience that he is genuinely doing it for the right reasons. Because if he has to try and convince himself that what he's doing is justified, then obviously it isn't. It's not, right? So I guess that is a kind of a crack in that veneer.
part of what makes this show interesting is that, you know, Beck is not someone without flaws or someone without issues, right? But that doesn't justify the ways in which she's being treated, right? So in the concept of her being like not trustworthy, people kind of fall into that narrative that Joe's portraying, that, oh, she's not a trustworthy person, she needs to be controlled. But, you know, then you kind of clue back as the audience member and say like, well, the entire relationship is built on a false premise, right? The entire relationship is, the very fabric of the relationship is like artificial, right? And it's like carefully curated in order for him to get what he wants out of it, right? So I feel like there are elements where they are putting Beck's behavior, I guess, on par with his, right? And if that were the case, if this was like an organic relationship, that would make some sense, but it's not, right? And I think people kind of do lose that when they're watching the show. They get so caught up and so swept up in the kind of seemingly normal aspects of the relationship that they
cheating?
That they
Doesn't
forget.
Really matter.
Yes.
And the fact that like is she cheating, and they're showing the two of them side by side, and I'm like, okay, but she is going legitimately to a therapist as herself to discuss her life and whatever,
And
he is going pretending to be someone else with like a fabricated story and a whole other thing, and it's like this is not the same thing. You are not the same.
Yeah, and he even like again his lies are so pathological to the point where he makes himself out to be the victim, right? So when he does confront her about the cheating, right, he's invoking this emotion as if he hasn't done anything that would be 10 times worse. Every single action that he does is there to create the purpose of him trying to control back, right? But yeah, like I do believe that there are some people who, well, again, I went through the depths of Reddit to see what people actually thought, and one of them was people were doing that. They were equating a lot of her behaviors. Well, she goes out with guys who are seemingly not good for her, or like she binge drinks and like gets herself
she's
involved.
On Tinder and she's like doing all these other things.
Yeah,
but with her, it's that's an authentically human experience, and she's having authentically human experiences that people do this. People have this is what happens in people's lives, right? Yeah. Whereas Joe gives this idea as though he's just experiencing life authentically, but it's also fabricated. It's all fabricated in his actions. It's all fabricated in his internal dialogue. Right. It's just like so fraudulent. Like, whereas she's just like, I'm just authentically being myself and making mistakes, and I do stupid things. I pick relationships with people who are destructive. I pick flaky friends. I do things like that. Yeah. That's all authentically human things that we all do. But then when Joe's talking about how, someone has judged him or someone has misconstrued what he said, it's all fabricated. It's like there's nothing that's authentic.
Yeah, and she even does claim that, like, towards the end when she has that kind of, like, big monologue, right, about how her life is her own and he's in the cage and she's out of the cage temporarily. She says, it's my mess. It's my, like, who gave you the right to feel like you have to fix everything in my life, right? And, one of my notes is that Joe has a God complex, right? He really positions himself as the person who is to be the fixer of all things, right? And he does that a little bit in the relationship that he has with Paco, who's a young boy in his apartment complex. But particularly in this relationship, he positions himself as somebody who is supposed to save Beck. He doesn't see the mistakes that she's making as organic things that happened as a human being, right? And again, it's all fabricated in a way where he's trying to say, I'm trying to protect you from things. But again, he doesn't see her as an autonomous being who makes her own choices, makes her own mistakes, and should organically learn from those mistakes as she goes along. So yeah.
But there are,
No, and not completely his fault either. And that's what we talk about, especially when I'm doing like education workshops in schools. And as soon as I bring up toxic masculinity and there's like boys in there and they're always like, oh God, that thing. And I'm like, no, it's not something that it's not something that you are doing. It's something that affects you. And it's toxic masculinity, that idea that you have to be that, knight in shining armor on the white horse to come and save you, right? Because it's like, I am a man. I am meant to be a protector, a saver, this kind of like safe space for a woman to really be like unload all of her baggage and all of her problems onto, right?
So the only person that's your sole source of support. Because even at the end, when she starts talking to the therapist, he admits that like he's uncomfortable with the fact that she can talk to someone else. And so he sees himself as the only person that she can find support from.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's pretty much a lot of people in her life who believe that, right? So I don't know if we're going to naturally talk about the other aspects of her relationships, but like, for example, like the dynamic that she has in the first episode or the first 2 episodes, I think, with her poetry teacher, right? Like, so he is obviously exploiting that dynamic of teacher-student to be able to hit on her, right? And he is essentially the one who's holding the kind of rights to her life, right? Like the only way she can pay for her apartment, the only way that she can continue working in this sector is if she's working under him, right? And he's clearly exploiting that, right? So that's a transactional relationship. She has a transactional relationship with her kind of fair weather friends, right? The ones who, come in and they're just party friends.
They're all rich.
Yeah, they're all rich. They're all, she doesn't relate to them because she didn't kind of grow up in that environment, right? But
Peach offers to pay for her rent. rent and all these other things.
And like Peach, obviously, who's like a clear boundary pushing friend from the beginning. Like it is revealed later on that she is like obsessed with Beck, and she creates and she sees her romantically. But even in the first couple episodes, you see the ways in which she's meticulously trying to control a lot of the potential relationships that she may develop, right? So anytime Beck talks about like, oh, I'm interested in this person, she shuts it down, right? And she does it under the guise of like, I'm trying to support you, I'm trying to look out for you, I'm trying to protect you, when in fact, no, she's trying to isolate her. She's trying to essentially control her.
And the way that Beck's relationships have, even with her dad, and I mean, you don't get anything with her mom, you have no idea what that looks like, but what you do see, that seems to be something that she has been so normalized for her, that there are so many instances with Peach and with Joe in particular where when she does comment on or call them out for stepping over a boundary or pushing her in a certain way or whatever, almost immediately she backtracks it and apologizes. You know, like she will have moments where she says like, how dare you assume you know my life? How dare you like come in here and try and fix everything? Like it's not, you know, are you following me? Like she calls him out and then will immediately turn around and be like, I'm sorry that I'm so suspicious. I'm sorry that I, you know, that I was just upset and whatever. And I think it's that kind of like
push and pull.
That push and pull, like she feels like she gets angry but doesn't have the right to get angry. She feels like she's been violated but then doesn't have the right to feel violated. Like it's something that has become so embedded in how she sees relationships that it
because there's people in her life who are treating her well in some cases, but then not treating her well in others, right? So it's like she has kind of, again, like this conflicted feeling inside of her. Well, you know, Peach is giving me money when I need it, but she's, you know, being overbearing. Or like Benji, you know, the guy who she's hooking up with, right? You know, he does show up sometimes when I need him, but not on a consistent basis, right? Her father's very emotionally distant, but he took time out of his day to meet her and give her some money, right? And meet her at that. So like there are some like kind of almost crumbs of like intimacy that she has with certain people or positive situations that she has with certain people. And she kind of holds on to that as like, hopefully one day they will recreate that kind of behavior. When in fact, like she's more in love with the potential of people than who they actually are presenting themselves to be.
I wonder if it could not just be the potential, but also like in towards the end of the show when she's writing her sort of story and processing kind of what's been happening, she talks a lot about stories and fantasy. And so like we talked about how Joe has the narrative that everything needs to conform to. And we don't get her inner monologue as much, but I wonder to what extent she also has a kind of story that she wants everyone to conform to. Like she, you know, like she also wants to have a relationship that is this sort of knight in shining armor, and she is willing to overlook things in order to believe in that. Because but whereas with Joe, it's like he's deliberately constructing this incredibly pathological narrative. Hers is one that is much more promoted by society. It's one that I think we all. It's the Prince Charming. It's the fairy tale. She's very explicit about where it comes from. Whereas you know, his is very much coming from like his sense of who she is and building a narrative around her. Hers is more like, I want to believe
that people can
be this thing.
Well, and that's what I wanted to talk about too, and like how all of you felt about, because I feel like just female characters in the show in general had very much so this male gaze of like hopeless girls who are unaware of how hopeless they are. And and it's something that is a common theme in romantic comedies and all of this kind of stuff. And especially I remembered when, I forget what the friend's name was who was like Instagram famous. Annika. So Annika was just like, oh, you know, she had this idea of like, oh wow, she's this body positivity Instagram, you know, influencer, right? But it was the idea that like, oh, she's so tattered and broken inside, so hopeless, and no one has any idea, right? Peach is such a strong, independent person, but like doesn't want independence in any of her friends, and is that archetypal mother hen. She's just trying to ruin your life because her life isn't good enough. You know? So it's like always constantly this pitting women against each other, pitting women against themselves, constantly just coming up in the narrative of everything, right?
So I would say like his extension of like he doesn't see Beck as a fully fleshed human being, I feel like he extends that to all the women he interacts with, right? You know, like I really believe that like he's unable to see some of the aspects of women, deviating from his narrative of what women should be, right?
Yeah.
So, and again, like all of this is coming from Joe's mouth, right? So people don't really have the luxury of hearing from Annika's, you know, like inner monologue of like what she actually feels and who, or even Peach at a certain point, right? Like nobody really gets to hear the kind of inner workings of the people who he has this kind of fixed view of, right?
And you also often don't get to hear just their voice in general, because a lot of the time when they speak, it fades out and he talks over them. So you don't even get their actual voice and get the opportunity to make that decision for yourself. You're just left with him.
So, if you were to, like, let's say you're standing in front of first-year university students, and all the students are like, but Beck is an awful person, what would you say back to them? Or Beck deserves it, or Beck is like, she's stupid, like, why did she do all these things? What would you say back to them?
I mean, I would start off with, like, what do you know about Beck? Like, what do you see of her? What do you understand of her that is not delivered to you from the perspective of somebody who has been manipulating everything? Like, I think that, you know, Amina, that's a really good point, is that what you have seen of her has always been shaped by Joe's vision, his story, his desires, whatever. So you're not like, to say like, well, she deserved it, or, you know, she's not likable, or I don't like her, I don't trust her, whatever. It's all coming from his sense of he doesn't trust her, his sense of he feels like she needs protecting and she is too open and too vulnerable. You don't get very much of her. She's kind of blank.
An object.
She's she's really an object. And the like few times that you do get anything from her perspective, she is relatable. She is interesting. Like, she has more nuance, but you get like maybe 15 minutes out of the whole
dialogue,
the whole season. So it's, you know, that would be my thing, is to be like, why, like, when you say I don't like Beck, or she deserved it, or she's not, you know, sympathetic, what about her is it? Because guaranteed it's going to be actions that were described and presented to you through Joe's lens, right? It's not going to be any of the things that she said or did.
And she's essentially just reacting to the ways in which he's facilitating every situation, right? So it's like, it's not like she's acting on in a organic way, right? Like, he's carefully curating every single moment and every single situation for her to react to. And maybe sometimes her reactions aren't the best or the most healthy, but again, it's all based on the foundation in which he is controlling, right? So I think, and there's a level of, I guess, leeway that people give Joe that they don't give Beck, that like, because they give so much insight and so much time for Joe to explain himself, right? And explain where his actions stem from, you know, and they don't give that courtesy to Beck. People just kind of fill in the blanks and assume that, oh, she's acting this way because she's XYZ, right? When in fact, like, there are many different layers to her that have not been revealed in the show, right? So again, talking about the fact that Joe is the one who's controlling the narrative, therefore you're only seeing what he wants you to see of her, and also the ways in which it is perfectly okay to make mistakes in your life, right? Like, people kind of chastise her and demonize her for making very, very normal and human mistakes, especially at her age, when she's trying to figure things out. She's trying to flesh out what who she is, right? She even says in a couple of scenes, I don't know who I am, right? Like, she's very clear about the ways in which she's trying to kind of develop her own identity, right? And through that, she does make mistakes, right? She does gravitate to people who aren't that healthy for her, right? And but Joe doesn't give her the leeway to figure that out on her own accord, right? He believes that, he's the one who's trying to control it and trying to protect her. And
to what extent is it not just like it's through Joe and whatever, but like, we as a society are conditioned to be harder on women who make mistakes, or on anyone other than a white guy who makes mistakes. Like, they are allowed to make mistakes, and no one else is allowed to make mistakes, right? So I feel like when she does something that is, you know, silly or that you don't agree with, or she does the like horror trope of like, oh no, you left the key in the door, oh my god, what are you doing? You know, or like turn the key faster, whatever those things are. We are conditioned as a society to be harder on her for doing those things. Like, why didn't you just do this? Why didn't you just do that?
Why didn't you just put a lock? Why don't you have blinds? Why don't you do this?
It also then
But is it really her responsibility?
No,
because
it's about victim blaming. It's about shame, right? Because we, as the audience, become almost like, I love it. They always use it, like RuPaul always talks about in Drag Race stuff, but the like inner saboteur. We become the inner saboteur. We become the judge and the jury, saying, well, this is what you deserve because you acted in this way. Because it's that, and I feel like if anyone's watching this and they're in their let's say mid-20s, early 20s, whatever, their 20s, and they're watching these things, it's a lot of common mistakes that you make in your 20s, things that you mess up and do, right? So it's that inner, we have this object of this girl that we don't find out and get an intense knowledge of, right? And we see her doing things that maybe we've done wrong in the past, we've seen friends do wrong in the past, and we automatically have this immediate reaction to want to sabotage who she is and say, oh, well, you're the worst because you should have known better. This kind of judgment that we can project onto somebody else that we've projected onto ourselves or projected onto others.
But we all deserve the time to grow and learn and to explore the world and not be worried that someone's going to follow you and not be worried that someone's going to kill your ex.
It is that kind of like, why is it that we seem to think that it should be so normalized that everyone other than white dudes should be constantly living in a state of fear and constantly living in a state of paranoia. And then there's that also the like, you know, there are points where she describes her childhood and the influences, some of the relationships and influences in her life. And, you know, there seem to be elements of trauma there and not necessarily giving space for how that affects your ongoing relationships. Exactly. Like to suggest that, oh, well, she doesn't see this, she misses red flags. People miss red flags every day because they have grown up in unhealthy or toxic relationships, and that's what they know and that's what they recognize. It does not mean it is their fault for missing those red flags. The best we can do is try to encourage people to, you know, to look for them and like reach for support. But it's just that, like, I think just the socially, we're so like
conditioned to blame people for their own demise, right? And like, again, all of her relationships have a very clear pattern of being transactional, right? And if you go back to her relationship with her father, right, it is literally transactional in the ways in which he gives her money in order to buy her attention and time, right?
Shows up,
he
shows up.
Yeah, and it's like he, again, abandoned her very in her life as well. So she's used
a new family.
Yeah, and she's used to like people kind of dropping in and out of her life when they see fit for them, right? So again, she was modeled very early that kind of behavior is okay, and therefore she is recreating them in almost every aspect of her life without even knowing it, right? In some cases she is aware of it, and she's like, well, you know, these people don't care about me, these friends don't care about me, this poetry teacher just wants to have sex with me, you know, like she can see it on a very basic level, but it doesn't mean that she can always stop it from occurring, right?
Yeah, she didn't realize it with the therapist. It was very much so she didn't have that cognitive like click in to be like, I probably shouldn't be doing this. It was very much so like, oh, you're there in my time of need, you understand me, you're not making preconceived notions about me.
And like a lot of the people in her life are presenting themselves as somebody who could help her, right? Like, you know, so it's like they're not coming to her with saying, I'm going to take advantage of you and do this to you, right? They're presenting an opportunity to her. They're presenting her they're presenting themselves as a friend, as somebody who can
provide money or
help her career, or, you know, like
make food for her.
And then they kind of use that as an opportunity to exploit the dynamic, right? And oftentimes she's already she's too much into the relationship to be able to pull out, right? Because that's
the way she feels.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
I want to talk a little bit about her relationship with the professor, and then the conversation that she has with her friends about the professor beforehand. Because I don't know if you folks remember, but her friends are like, oh, he's so pervy. And then someone says something about like, do you want to report him?
Yeah.
But then they're like, no, that's not how society
works.
works.
She says that's not how it works. Like, they're like, you should report him, he's being inappropriate. And she's like, that's not how it works. I'll just lose everything.
Yeah.
So she definitely feels like she can't reach out, or she's been told that she can't.
Yeah, there's a lot of consequences to if she were to stand up to the people in her life, if she were to vocalize the issues that were occurring, right? Like if she were to stand up to Peach in the very beginning, she probably would lose that stream of financial support.
Yeah.
You know, if she were to, stand up to her fair weather friends, they would not hang out with her anymore and she'd be isolated, right? If she stood up to the poetry teacher, she would lose her housing, she would lose her... So it's like there was clear consequences that had her kind of stuck in those dynamics, right?
Or she couldn't sort of just call it out and say, like, this is a problem.
Which is true for so many people, right? Like, that is always the case. There are always... And I think you saw it again later when Joe is basically trying to guilt... the neighbor, I forget her name, Paco's mom.
Oh, yeah.
And he's trying to guilt her and being like, why did you let Ron keep coming back? Yeah. Why? And she's like, listen, like, if I didn't, I would have lost my son. Like, he had power over me. And I think it's the same thing of like, if nobody is saying, here are the consequences to me doing this, it's very easy to say, well, just stand up and just do this and take this action. But we know that the reason that somebody who's in an abusive relationship often doesn't is because of the consequences as well as the emotional entanglement and all of that.
But then they kind of like dusted that away with the whole like addiction and being like, well, you're not even a good mom for Papa kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So it was
he
just
still
like...
try to position himself as knowing what's best for that dynamic.
Yeah,
and like,
absolutely.
I just found it ironic, like in that particular situation, like, or in just general, Joe is very impressed with himself of how well he's able to read people in situations. But for some reason, he could not read the fact that he could not understand why a woman would stay in an abusive situation when he's replicating those dynamics of abuse in his own personal life with other people, right? He doesn't understand, like, you and Ron are the same side or different sides of the same coin, right? Yeah. It's like you are essentially...
Use your power, but in slightly different ways.
Yeah, and she's just as much under the control of Ron as Beck is under the control of you, right? So, and the fact that he wasn't able to make that connection and someone had to say it to him directly for him to get it was kind of ironic. But also that the piece of him and Ron, kind of coming together and seeing the same kind of dynamics in each other, right? Like Ron was already very, very suspicious of anything that Joe did, right? Like he basically said, like, I know who you are. I know what you're up to, right?
Takes one to know one.
And because he saw in himself what he saw in Joe what he sees in himself, right? And I feel like both of them had that situation. And even with Joe and Peach as well, they both kind of came to that conclusion where it's like, we're both more similar than we are different. And that's when they kind of came, they were kind of like mirror images of each other.
One of us must die.
Yeah.
There can only be one.
But yeah, I think the like, it is interesting because there's a point in that conversation with the friends talking about the poetry professor as well, where somebody, like one of her other friends says, well, I had sex with my bio professor or something, an undergraduate, and like, hey, I passed. And it's something that
it justifies it.
I find interesting because I think like, and like, this might be my own background in like higher, like academia. But like when it is in high school, I think like, obviously there are still abuses of power that happen, but generally people are like, you can't, that is like an inappropriate relationship. Like most people are comfortable with that. Once you get to the university level and you have TAs who are a year or two older than you, or you have, an advisor who it's like, well, but they're, like I work for the same department, so we're colleagues, but also they're my advisor. And the like lines of power become more difficult to follow. It's not that they become blurred because they're still very stark, but they become more difficult to follow, and it's easier to find yourself in a situation where you are going out for drinks with your thesis advisor or with other people that you work with at a university, and that may not seem abnormal, but how do you articulate that it was proposed in a way that felt creepy, right? Like I think, and so I think I appreciated, even though she's saying, well, that's not how it works, I kind of appreciated that because it isn't how it works in the current academic state. And I'm not saying it should be how it works. But for I think a lot of people, it would not be considered abnormal to say, well, my thesis advisor said, let's talk this out over a drink. That would not be considered completely abnormal. But then how do you say it was the way he asked me to talk about it over a drink. That's the thing where it becomes difficult to report someone, because it's not necessarily about what has happened. It's about the way that it was done. So I appreciated that they're having that conversation. I didn't like that it was just dusted off. That it was just, she's like, well, I also slept with my professor. It's totally a normal thing to do.
Yeah.
No, it's not. It is not.
No, especially not to get a grade.
Yeah.
Not to get a grade, like not, and again, that transactional thing, like as long as you get something out of it, it's okay. It is not. It is still abusive. It's not a good, like it is.
But that's what people can look at that and be like, ooh, branded as feminism. Yeah, we had one girl, she was just like, she took ownership and was owning it and owning who she was. That's, I am woman, hear me roar, right? So that's what, but that's what people do. That's what they do in movies where it's just like, oh my God. So if a woman, it's just like, having the idea that like every woman is hypersexualized and that's what we all look like, and that's what empowerment looks like for every woman, you know, is being hypersexualized and getting, I got that grade, but you know what, it was worth it because I had control the entire time.
When in fact the dynamic itself is
you
like
did not have control.
Ignoring dynamics, ignoring all of that stuff and being like, okay, well this is totally like the story, this is the nice pretty package. Right?
So again, like kind of trying to use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house.
Thing,
right? Like, but in that particular situation as well, I think people spend, I saw on the internet, the World Wide Web. Have you heard of it? I saw a lot of people like particularly blaming Beck for getting herself in that situation because she was aware of the fact that the professor wanted her. Right, so it's like there was a level of her, it was not like she was going in completely blind and it was totally blindsided. Like there was a level of her knowing that this guy wanted her. Yeah,
and even they mentioned it, I think, in like with her friends or whatever. And it's not specific to that scene. There's another one where I think with Candace where she's going to meet like a music producer or something, and he says like, "Oh, you want him to think that he can have sex with you?" And she was like, "Yes." And I think like. There are points where the show does give nods to the fact that
we live in a world.
Where you are expected to do exactly that. To like when you know
sexuality is currency.
Exactly, and that you may not like it, and it doesn't mean that it is not abusive, but that there are a lot of people who would still go for that drink because they're like, well, if I just shot him down, I would be risking my career. I'd be risking my home. I'd be risking my job. And
it's
so
the fact that women have to use
it's like they
don't have any other option.
And you just like I hope that I can go to this and just flirt, and that will be enough. And I hope I don't have to go and draw that line.
The professor says, "You flirt brazenly. You wear clothes so sheer I can see your nipples, and blowjob eyes." Like you're reading way into her look. Like you. What?
Yeah, like
where
looking
do
nice.
Blowjob eyes come from?
He's just like projecting his idea of what he wants from the situation.
Well, that's constantly what happens to Beck.
But it's also like that's a very common narrative after sexual violence in general. That like you wore this, you looked like this. Why did you show up? Why did you show up? You were flirting.
Why did you drink?
And like it's not like the idea that you can't flirt but not want to have sex. You can't get dressed up without trying to attract specifically male attention. That they have to eat, and that it's your fault if you let anything happen. You've let everything happen.
You knew the possibilities.
Right? You knew exactly. And it's like it completely ignores the reality that like maybe you feel like. We have been trained from a very young age to feel flattered by attention, like as women in society, specifically by male attention. Like it's difficult to override things you've been taught from a young age, but it's that like blaming of people for doing things that actually make sense, and like not saying that they're awesome things, but like she was doing something that she felt was the best course of action
with the limited choices that she had.
With the limited choices that she had, right? Like she was like, these are my choices. I see the outcomes of the different options, and I'm gonna go with this one and hope it works out. And I think the fact that so many people online and in the show are quick to jump on her and say, well you wore this and you did this and it's your fault. Like that is just.
But she only has that option. So
exactly.
Is it really her choice?
Kind of that's rape culture. culture. Like that's what we see every day is the fact that you can go in and just even suggest that it's not her fault and you get this backlash.
And not even taking the time to weigh the options of like what if she doesn't have the internship or she's not working as a TA or whatever, then she can't be in school. And then what happens? She doesn't have an education, and then what is she going to have to fall back on? Her looks, and so that she can marry somebody who has money at Peach. Like being the leash off of her friends, she was already worried because she can't go out and do things as much as she wants to with them, and being like, she doesn't have the money. So it's just like all of these ideas of like, well, I have to fit into this trope and do this thing just so that I don't have to do it later.
Exactly.
It's like, absolutely. It's like a
lesser evil. Like two of lesser evil.
And I think for a lot of people, a lot of people who are not white dudes spend a lot of time evaluating like what is the lesser of the evils here. What line can I ride to sort of like do something that that doesn't put me in immediate danger, or hopefully doesn't put me in too much immediate danger, but not also like not too much danger, but like that is a negotiation that is the reality for a lot of people and is not actually considered in these types of shows. Like it's not portrayed.
There wasn't a dialogue where she's like, well, if I do this, then I lose.
No. She just said that's not how it works. And the interesting thing is
like the start of the whole.
For us, we can hear that's not how it works. And we like, see all of the things that are happening. But that's not usually, like, people don't necessarily always dive into it.
And I think, like, now, like, thinking about it from the writer's perspective, I think there was an intentional piece of making Beck a blank canvas for people to project their ideas onto her, right? So if they were to complicate her, if they were to give her that nuance, to give her that level of agency, then people would have a hard time believing the narratives of others, right? So I think there was a level of, like, we need to make her a bit of a blank canvas to have people kind of control and manipulate the narrative.
Joe. So, other question that we have written down. What is Joe's definition of love, and why is it problematic?
Toxic.
It's toxic.
Messed up.
It's not even problematic. It's just like really, really bad all the way around.
Because again, like his first introduction to what he's never had healthy relationships in his life, right? Like the first introduction that he had, with his stepfather, he still feels that's
the stepfather.
Yeah,
it's
stepfather.
He's like the owner.
Boss.
Yeah, he's the owner.
And he took him in. He took him in.
Yeah, but was
he jumps around foster homes.
He was like his guardian or legal guardian, right? So it's like Joe never really had that stability of love, and the only model of love that he had was from an abusive person, someone who would literally lock him in a cage and
throw
tell
him down
him
the stairs and then lock him in a cage.
So
I'm doing this for you is what he would say.
But when he has callbacks to talking about his relationship, especially when he's talking to Paco about the relationship that he had and how he learned, it's still in a very affectionate manner. We're not even giving the connotations of he was so terrible. It was like still in that for the greater good. I wouldn't be the person I am today if it wasn't for this man who helped me and got me so interested into literature and books and all. So it's just like
it's a story that he needs to tell himself in order to justify what happened to him, right?
Exactly.
And how he justifies what he does to others.
Which snowballs into other areas of his life.
So again, like his fundamental and core relationships were built on unhealthy dynamics, right? So his idea of love, or what a common mutual love,
good loving relationship
is distorted, right?
And it's
from
based
the start,
like it seems to be completely around control. Like everything, he needs to control all things. And I think it comes from being controlled was part of that relationship. And he's mimicking it. But it's like when he talks about loving Beck, it's like I need to protect, i.e. control you. And it that's something that just I think is at the basis of his idea of love is
I will do. I think there's a line in the last episode where it's like, I will not.
There's no line I will not cross for you.
Yeah. And it's like, no, there should be a line.
There should be many lines that you do not cross for someone.
Yeah. And then you can see it in the sense of like some of the biggest freakouts he has where he gets very worried are the times when he loses control.
Yeah.
So it's the time when he's interacting when Benji dies, right?
Yeah. I don't know what to do with his body.
Yeah, what to do with the body, freaking out. When he attacks Peach, it's just like that moment of, oh wow, it went too far, I took it too far. And then not the last one, but another one is when the cop pulls up to the car, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't know what I'm gonna do, what I'm gonna say, why am I here? Like all of these kind of ideas where it's just like,
but he really comes up with stuff fast.
He comes up with stuff fast, but it's like those panicking moments where you're like, even just the
this is an actual organic moment.
Control completely rocks his world.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And again, like he sees everything as very black and white. He's very rigid in his worldview. And like, again, the kind of metaphor of the box, like this is what I believe the world is and what I believe anyone who deviates from that box needs to be corrected or eliminated, right? So it's like
and it's interesting to see when
he
his
literally
gaze
eliminates them.
kind of lands on other people, and it's like you can see him kind of like, do I need to eliminate you? Like, are you a problem that needs to be eliminated? And then like, oh no, you're fine. Like, it's
because he looks at Paco like that almost like he has a second where it was like, I'm like, oh my god, is he gonna kill Paco?
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh no, he's just gonna take him on as his little apprentice which I think is gonna happen.
To kill other people.
Yeah,
keep
exactly.
his secrets.
Yeah, and again, like his, it's all stemming from a kind of fundamental fear that he has about he doesn't know himself outside of this control dynamic, right? Like this is his identity, this is who he is built, or this is who he believes himself to be. So his fear is stemming from, oh, if this doesn't fit into my worldview, then who am I and what do I mean to the world, right? So again, all of it is stemming out of fear of who he believes himself to be. But again, everybody is also just an extension of his wants and his needs. They're not fully fleshed human beings.
Yeah.
They're not autonomous beings.
Well,
right?
that is sort of like echoed in the way that he sort of puts all those books on a pedestal, and they're all written by white men.
Frankenstein is a white woman.
Oh, there you go. There we go.
Awesome.
Yeah. But like he talks about all these TV shows, and those are not really characters. They're just, there's a screen between them, and he puts all these things on a pedestal, and he's like, this is what love is. Yeah. And it's all what's in books and what's in movies, but it's nothing in real life.
And it's
tangible.
Fixed. It's very fixed. Right?
Yeah. There's like there's
no
beginning, middle, and end. He's got all
that is an interesting point. Like, if it's a story, stories have beginning, middles, and ends.
Yeah.
And like, part of me wonders, like, with Beck, what would he have done if she hadn't found that box and hadn't confronted him? Like, I feel like there would, because like that's
there would have been a final, like,
there would have been an end.
She probably would have gotten hurt no matter what.
That's something that I was talking about this before we started, but one of the things that I was uncomfortable with was the fact that they took his manipulation and control and all of those things to a kind of like Ted Bundy serial killer.
Like very clearly,
like, okay, he's murdered someone, and quite quickly. And I thought it would have been more effective for me to see what we see every day, which is the way that abuse.
He does everything but kill someone.
Yeah, like or like when someone is killed, it's almost always the person who's in the relationship, right? Yeah. Like it's not
like it's her. It's not
exactly.
Benji,
it would not be
Peach.
Benji or Peach. It would have been her. And the way that like because that persona that he's maintaining around her, like that always will crack, right? Like that, and when that cracks, that's when things become more violent, because
it's a matter of when.
And he will always be the perfect boyfriend, but she will not always be the perfect girlfriend.
Exactly.
And that is the common narrative, even with the last girlfriend. It was like everything was so perfect until she and like when that happened. And so like it's like those stories always have a beginning, middle, and end. So even though he's talking about like, you are the one, and this is this is like our endless love or whatever, the truth is it was always going to get to that point, because there was always going to need to be an end.
I'm just thinking about this now, but I'm just realizing the kind of metaphor that they do of him fixing the books, right? Like he sees people as like these broken, tattered books that need to be meticulously put together, right? Like he sees like, oh well, all I have to do is
fix you.
All I need to do is like peel this away and fix that and sew this back up, and everything will be back to normal. right?
Yeah.
So that's
no one will even know.
Yeah, no one will
Yeah.
even know that there was anything wrong, right?
Yeah.
So it's like he kind of like uses that to apply it to every single person in his life, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wonder if we can take a moment to like, from Beck's perspective, let's say we were like walking through Beck's world with her. What are the times in which you would have been like, that is a red flag, you need to leave? Like, what are things that because like, there's a lot in his internal monologue that from our perspective, we're like, that's a rape myth. That's really misogynist. That's really sexist. But from Beck's perspective, if we were walking through her story with her, if, like, let's say we were a friend and we were watching all this, what would we say, like, oh.
My first one would be the credit card. Like, within seconds.
But does he say that out loud?
He does.
Yeah, he does. He says Guinevere Beck. Like, he doesn't say it, but he like reads it, and I'm like,
he reads
the second
it.
you like, I give you my card to buy something, and you take it and you read my name, I'm like, nope,
Okay, so that's a red flag.
that's a red flag. Nope.
All right.
I'm trying to think of something like further along. I think there was that point where, like, you know, we all, even when we have like those flaky friends or that idea of just like, when just like someone in your life can perceive someone in a different light, but it's like, I think there's something off. I always say, like, obviously I can't let my friends dictate my relationships,
Right.
but when somebody else from a different objective view, like a different POV says, oh, you know what? This is, I don't know if this person's right.
Yeah.
It doesn't make me immediately go, oh yeah, for sure you're the worst, but it makes me kind of take a lens of like, oh yeah, maybe what about this person am I misguided about because of the haze of how I feel about them or the ideas that I've created about them. So I think that's
What are you
always
seeing
a great,
that I might not see?
yeah, I don't take it as an immediate alarm of get out, but it's very much so of like, okay, what are you
ponder,
seeing that I'm missing?
Yeah, and I think like that would have helped if Peach didn't do that with every single relationship that, you know, if she was just talking about Joe and like was generally fine with any other relationship, then maybe it would kind of ring more true to Beck. But Beck was probably very used to Peach kind of like demonizing
Dismissing,
yeah.
Although I still think, like, in conjunction with, there were, like, definitely things like when he shows up somewhere you are and he's like, oh, I saw this building in the background of one of your pictures on Instagram,
and then I Googled it, and then
reverse
went
Google
there.
searched and then I found you. I would be like, no.
Well, even
No.
at that point, I think they had only been on a date or two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
And it's like, you're following my Instagram. Not only do you follow it, which is like, okay.
Fine, sure.
But then you see a photo, and then you reverse Google.
Oh, hang on, sorry. He's following her Instagram. He doesn't have social media, which means it's not like he's on social media, whatever. It means like he went onto Google Chrome and typed in
her
like
name.
your Instagram and then scrolled through your things and
Found
does
the
that
photo.
regularly enough to see a recent photo you've updated.
Yeah.
Within the time span so that he can then follow you to like, what, an hour and a half away?
Yes.
Then takes off work, then follows you and shows up and is like, oh, I'm going to surprise you.
Yeah.
Also, be wary of somebody who you saw at a bookstore opportunely saves you from a train hitting.
Yeah.
That's just like, that's
Right,
too much.
yeah,
Even
yeah.
for me, I'm just like, oh wow, you're here. That's
a lot.
Universe does not work that way.
Yeah, there are many, like, again, there are many kind of things where he was using social media as a crutch to, like, justify his behavior, right?
You're already posting it on there. It's public.
And there is also levels of, like, when they do break up, right? And, like, Guinevere is, like, also checking his social, like...
But she checks it, like, once.
Or she's checking Karen's social media, who is, like, so she is checking, like, periodically, which is a normal, but like again, it's not healthy for her her mental health, right? Like because she's constantly checking up on a relationship that is no longer present, right? But it's not going to the point where she's like creating a fake profile or not, or just like showing up randomly. Well, there was one scene where she did kind of, I was walking in the neighborhood getting something and she ran into
but it was portrayed as
Yeah.
like, oh, that's weird and creepy.
Yeah,
What are you
everyone.
doing
But then
here?
he does it a bunch of times.
He does
and
it all the
it's like,
time. Yeah.
Oh my god, no big deal.
but can I say,
people
like-
kind of, I saw that people read that as like her being desperate, as her kind of like, oh, she's
not
trying
like
to get
she's
back.
been manipulated and like
and it's like no
gaslit.
Are we going to talk about all the other times where he's just like shown up randomly at places where she's been because he's like been stalking
And he
her
gives like
at a
the
level.
thinnest excuse, and she's like, "Oh,
I love to
okay,
sell books at a fair." That's basically what he said.
But like the biggest red flag for me was probably, I mean, like the card is one. But like even before that in the bookstore when they're first talking and he like she's standing there and she's asking about a book and they start talking about like, oh, that book, I like that author review. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of normal and whatever. Yeah. And then there's a point where he like puts his arm around her and like directs her to like start looking at other people and start judging them in a very like superior way. And I'm like, first of all, that kind of like physical intrusion into my space would have been a red flag for me, but that's me. That may not be everyone. But the fact that he starts doing a very superior, like, I am going to judge that guy over there for what he buys, and I'm going to judge this couple here, and like that's something that he does again on their first date, where they start judging various people. And for me, that would have been a big red flag, like, independent of like the stockier behavior or whatever, of like this is somebody who's judgmental and who sees himself as superior and better than other people. And how is that going to relate to me? Is he going to see himself better than me? Is he going to put himself on a pedestal? So like that's something that would have been a big red flag for me, because like that, like the fact that this is how you're trying to flirt with someone.
For me, the red flag is, like, I think she starts asking about, so Candace. And then he kind of brushes over it and doesn't really talk about the relationship. And for me, if you're not willing to, like, be like, oh, yeah, that relationship happened, this is how it ended, like, this is what I learned from it. And then even when she says, like, wait, I don't even know about your family, I don't know about your friends, who are you? And then instead of talking about his family or friends, he shows her his books. Like, for me, that's a big red flag. Like, you won't talk about the people that are in your life and the healthy relationships. Like, if you have a really healthy relationship with your best friend or your mom, or it doesn't really matter who you have a healthy relationship with.
And the only people in his life that he has relationships with are Paco, who's his neighbor, and his colleague. He doesn't seem to have friends or family outside of that.
And, like, he does temporarily show his, I guess, stepfather who is like in a kind of capacitated state because he's had a stroke, right? So he does temporarily like lift the veil of like, this is what I want you to see because I believe this is what you believe an organic, intimate moment is.
Which, by the way, I want to find out how he got there.
Right. I do not trust. Like, when you date someone, you get to know their people. Sometimes you stay friends after that relationship has ended. Like, where are your people? Right?
Where are your people?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah,
everyone knows people.
And like he just again temporarily lifts the veil and to kind of ease her out of asking more questions, right? So it's like, I'm only showing you my stepfather because I don't want you to ask further. I'm only showing you this like maybe fake profile of Candace just so I can wear you off with asking more questions about her, right? So it's like he's creating these artificial moments of intimacy so that she is kind of
gets her off the scent.
They're super like romance movie manufactured. Like, when he shows me, he's like, this is who I am, these books are who I am, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, that's straight out of like The Notebook or something. Like, that's a kind of, that's where
that's a red flag,
right? That's a red flag.
That's a red flag.
Yeah. Like all of his relationships, or what he believes a relationship is, have been modeled through the literature that he reads, right?
I know this is a show, and obviously a lot of the things that they're doing, it's like they need drama. They want, like,
that, of course, dramatic.
It's a sensationalized. Like, of course, he kills people and he goes Ted Bundy crazy because like otherwise it's not as fun to watch, which is kind of scary. But but it's also the day-to-day pieces of abuse that it portrayed are actually quite real. On point and real. The way that Beck finds herself when she does question, like, why are you here, or why are you asking me this, why are you giving me this advice, and then finds herself compelled to apologize for it. That's a very real situation that survivors find themselves in.
Right.
The feeling like, I am responsible for this, or I am being paranoid. That's something that abusers manipulate,
but wasn't addressed as something that happens.
No. So it's like it's portrayed,
but then they don't say, but this is also problematic, you should know that.
And they don't necessarily need to say it
out loud,
but something
to solidify
to suggest, like, something to give a sense that, like, you know, there are so many different people who are going to read this. There's always going to be people who say Beck is unsympathetic and people who say I love Joe and you can't. But when that's the majority of people's responses, then I have questions about like what has the show you've made done.
Yeah, and like again, like they're releasing it out into a world where these kinds of biases occur or exist already, right? So it's like there is again a level of responsibility from creators to be able to understand that when they put something out in the world, it can be interpreted in many different ways, right? But there's also a level of audience responsibility to be able to not just be fed the like very like simplistic layer of themes that they're providing you, right? And again, the intentional piece of Joe being the unreliable narrator is that a lot of the things that are being portrayed are justified because that's what he truly believes, right? So again, the level of like, again, the audience is being in that push and pull dynamic of an abusive cycle, of an abusive relationship, right? Like the audience is being gaslighted into believing that this behavior is normal, right? So again, we have the kind of context doing the work that we do that we're able to see it, but even in certain cases, we kind of fell into it. Like in some cases, I kind of fell into it, right? Like even the aspects of like,
why didn't you protect your phone?
Why didn't you protect
your phone?
Have a password?
Yeah,
why does nobody have
drapes?
passwords ever, right? Like, you know, that those are the things that I was asking, but then I would quickly correct myself,
like,
right?
That's victim blaming. And we're told in society that we should do that, but why do we have to push people into living in a world where they feel unsafe all the time and they have to do all these things?
Or even just sympathizing with him, being like, oh no, is the cop going to get him? Like, oh no, that's going to ruin the whole plan. Is the
number
P-jar,
the cop should get him.
I was Googling, does urine have DNA as well? I was like, what's going on?
Right, So there's a lot of like situations where it's like, you're
rooting for him.
And like, but again, like that also talks about the nuances and the nature of how complex abusers can be, right? Like just like victims, abusers are human beings, and they're able to compartmentalize certain aspects of themselves and show certain aspects of themselves to kind of fit their own narrative, right? So I do. As somebody who works in this field, who is able to see these things very clearly, I do appreciate the fact that they didn't make him all bad all the time to everybody, right? Because you know what's hard.
Most abusers aren't bad all the time
to everybody, right? So it's like
it's very rare,
right? So like everybody, like again, has a very kind of black and white trope of like what an abuser is, right?
And what a perfect victim.
What a perfect victim is, right? And like with Joe, again, he showed many different layers where he's able to be good natured in quotations, right? With his relationship with Paco.
Grooming. He's just grooming everyone. He's grooming everyone from the start. He wants you to have this kind of idea of who he is and how he acts, and this is his true person. Because everyone can always go back. If you start off a relationship where you're like, this is who I truly am, this is my true self, then it doesn't matter where you go or how far you push or how neglecting or withholding or how you're controlling that you're acting, I can always go back to that memory of that true person. You know?
Right.
So it's like
So again, he's grooming everybody in his life, including the audience themselves, right? So I think that was portrayed well. As somebody who, again, is able to see these themes very clearly.
I still would have liked to see some of the abuse a little more explicit. That other than like apart from the like, okay, well, he's killed someone, some of the actual like the abuse and violence towards Beck.
I've noticed like they were clear about showing aspects of him murdering people, but they did not show the scene where he hit her, I think.
Killed her.
Like they didn't show
Beck?
So I was wondering, I'm like, why are they so okay with showing him like hitting a rock over Peach's head, or you know, like
but then that would distort the whole narrative for him.
True self.
Like,
That's true.
Belonging.
It's weird that he blacked out the clear like physical signs of abuse that because like it blacked out, and then she was just in the cage, and she's like, well, you hit me, right? And like you never really got that opportunity to see it clearly. Like I think because again, maybe he's trying to black it out in his own mind. He's trying to not
which I think a lot of abusers do, where they don't maybe remember the extent of the violence, or you know, like they're like, I know, you know, things got violent, but they don't have like specifics, whereas somebody who's experienced it is like, I can tell you exactly what happened, right?
Exactly.
Well, thank you for listening to our thoughts on the Netflix show You. You can watch it on Netflix. And then listen to our podcast and think about or consider all the perspectives that maybe we have that maybe you don't or maybe you do. If you need support...
If you need support, you can reach out to the Ottawa Rape Crisis Center's 24-hour crisis line, which is at 613-562-2333.
Or you can reach out to the Sexual Assault Support Center of Ottawa's 24/7 support line, 613-234-2266.
And I'm sure you can let us know what you thought. I'm sure there will be a comment section. We're still figuring out the technology aspect, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And
Also, we're all on social media. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram.
All
obviously.
hate mail go to Allie. I don't know.
No. If you want to give us feedback, do you want to plug all our social medias?
Yeah.
If you want to find out Planned Parenthood on social media, we're at PeakP Ottawa on Twitter and on Facebook.
Mm-hmm. On all platforms, we are at SASC Ottawa, SASCOTTAWA.
And ORCC, because we're not consistent, which is awful. But on Instagram, we are Ottawa Rape Crisis, and I think on Twitter, we are Ottawa Rape Crisis Center.
Wait, I thought...
Or maybe the other way around.
Underscore tweets?
Yes, that's on Twitter.
Yeah.
Sorry, on Facebook.
Oh, okay.
We are Ottawa Rape Crisis Center, and I think on Instagram, it's Ottawa Rape Crisis.
Yeah.
So on Instagram, we are CCGSD_CCDGS. And if you have any comments or questions, you can send messages also to my email. It's education@CCGSD-CCDGS.org.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.